Hey friends, it's Elizabeth. Thanks for checking out our YouTube messages. I have been working with students for a while now, and one of the things I like about hanging around high schoolers and middle schoolers is learning all the words that you invent. So I like to try and keep up with y'all so I know, what the heck you're talking about. And some of my favorites: low-key, bet, cap. I had no idea. I don't ever use that, but I at least now know what it means. And another one that I've heard some of you use, and I definitely use as well, is cringy. I can't imagine not using it because it works for all kinds of topics, like talking about those weird moments on The Bachelor, or eating a gas station hot dog, or watching the really awful TikTok videos, all cringy. And there's another topic that could potentially feel cringy at first, although I promise that I'll make a total effort to handle it well. We're talking about sex. And so for the last few weeks, we've been discussing things like sex, virginity, and porn. So you're probably awake now. You're like, oh my gosh, she just said all of those words. And while we're trying to keep it low key and not stress anybody out, there's still something about these topics that feels a little uncomfortable. But why is that? Why are we so uncomfortable? So I think one reason is because when it comes to sex, sometimes adults talk about it in a really intense way. So maybe your health teacher talks about sex, like you're going to get an STD and die, like the clip from Mean Girls. Maybe your parents are more nervous about having the talk with you than they are about teaching you how to drive. Maybe you've heard people at church talk about sex like it's the most important thing ever in the entire world. And so here's what's confusing. While some adults talk about sex like it's dangerous or bad, other adults seem to think it's no big deal at all. So maybe you have family members who talk about sex like it's totally casual. You've listened to songs where artists talk openly about it, celebrities joke about it, and it's pretty much all over the internet. So people who talk openly about it seem to be doing just fine. So here's what I'm getting at. Some people act like having sex is catastrophic, and others act like it's completely casual. So, which is it? Most of us don't pick catastrophic, and that's maybe because you've known people who had sex and they didn't die. It didn't completely ruin their life. Maybe you've had sex and you didn't die. You're watching this video. Didn't ruin your life. And when you talk to people who've experienced something and they tell you it's no big deal, the most logical thing seems like to believe that it's no big deal. So we get into a pattern of believing sex is casual, and you've probably maybe never thought about it in those exact words, but maybe you've told yourself that a hookup is no big deal. Maybe you've tried to talk yourself out of catching feelings for someone you've been physical with, made all kinds of jokes and laughed about sexual things, or sent nudes. Maybe you've pushed someone's boundaries or even your own, because you told yourself it wasn't really a big deal. And so if that's you, obviously I am not saying you're a bad person at all. I'm saying that you, like the rest of us, live in a world where the normal pattern of thinking is that sex is a casual thing. So it's natural for us to start believing that. At the same time, even when we tell ourselves something isn't a big deal, you may have noticed that sometimes it becomes a bigger deal. Maybe you've noticed that it wasn't a big deal to one friend who hooked up, but it really affected another. Something was said as a casual joke, but it still made you feel really uncomfortable. Somebody told you to be chill about it, but it really affected you. Or porn seemed casual until you saw something that made you feel awful. So even though sex isn't catastrophic, there are times when it doesn't seem so casual either. So think about it this way. Sex isn't casual no matter how casually it's treated. And so that's why the goal here today is not to tell you what to think. I want to help you understand how to think when you hear two competing ideas about a subject that can affect your life. To do that, I want to look at something the Apostle Paul wrote in a letter to a group of Christians in Rome. And here's what you need to know about Rome at the time Paul wrote this. The messages coming from Roman culture were not the same as the messages Jesus had proclaimed. So when people started to follow Jesus in the Roman Empire, there was tension between what was normal at the time and the life Jesus was inviting them to. It's possible that they were feeling the same sort of things we are, conflicting messages about God and what it means to follow Jesus. And chances are they felt some confusion over what was the real story and who they should believe. And so with that in mind, Paul writes this: "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." Paul is never one to dance around the point. He gets right to it. He's saying that there's a certain way the people around you live. There's a pattern, but that doesn't mean you should conform to it. God is inviting you to do something different. He isn't just asking you to believe something about him or about the world. He's asking you to live differently. He's asking you to treat yourself and others differently as a result. God doesn't just want to be a good idea to you. He wants to be the force that shapes the decisions you make. So in terms of sex, what are some of the normal behaviors or patterns of the world? It's definitely a culture of casual sex, but there's more to the story. So a few verses later, Paul says this: "Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves." Paul obviously isn't talking about sex or dating here, but that doesn't mean his advice doesn't apply to that area of our lives. He tells us to love and care about each other sincerely. That doesn't mean to pretend like you care about someone or be fake so that you can get something from them. He tells the Romans and us to really love others, to hate what is evil, wrong, or hurtful, and hang on to what is good. That's a different message than we're hearing in a culture of casual sex. So think about it this way. If we have to talk ourselves out of feeling something, if we have to turn off our conscience in order to make that joke or watch that clip or open that picture, then we are not being sincere, genuine, or real. We're being fake. We're just pretending, and God has called us to something more. God is inviting all of us to be transformed into something new, something better. He's calling us to be the kind of people who understand that how we treat another human being is never casual, no matter how casually people act about it. God, who invented sex, designed it to be a good thing, to be significant, and to matter. And if we're getting messages that tell us that it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, or we should have less feelings about it, that doesn't line up with the heart of God. In a culture of casual sex, there's more to the story. And Paul tells us to transform our minds beyond what culture tells us. But how do we do that? To start, you need to know that if you're feeling any shame over things you've done in the past, there's absolutely no judgment here. Every single one of us has done something we regret, something that we aren't proud of, or something we wish we would have thought through more than we did. No one is better than anyone else. We're all created in the image of God, and we're all called to do what Paul is suggesting, no matter what our sexual history is. We can all be transformed and begin thinking in a new way. So here's how. Start by identifying where you have been affected by a thought pattern. So when it comes to sex, what are ways you're tempted to conform or just go along with what everyone else is saying or doing? Start paying attention to the way culture influences your thinking. And then be transformed, as Paul says, by renewing your mind. So changing how your mind works is not easy, but here's some tips that can hopefully be helpful. If you want to change the way you talk or joke about sex, maybe memorize a Bible verse to remind you of the power of your words. Maybe there's a pattern for the decisions you make when you go to certain parties or hang out with certain people. The end result's usually the same. So for you, that decision might be that you need to maybe avoid certain people or places for a little while. Maybe instead of thinking about people as objects for your benefit, begin thinking about people as human beings who are uniquely created and loved by God. And maybe it's a pattern that has created some secrets that are slowly hurting you. I know this one is extra difficult, but sometimes it's the absolute best way to change your thinking is to talk about what you're thinking with someone older, wiser, and trustworthy. I know that's a hard one, but when you're talking to someone older, wiser, and trustworthy, they are not going to judge you. Like all said, we've all done things we regret. And that way you can talk to them and they can help hold you accountable in the future as well. What is it that you would like to see transformed in your life? No matter what it is, just know that sometimes a transformed mind starts with transformed behavior. In other words, even if it takes a while for your thinking to change, you can start living like a transformed person right now. Your thinking will then follow. So live like there's more to the story when it comes to sex. Live like sex isn't casual.